thanks to all of you who have joined us this morning, including those of you who are listening in. This is the Lead Like a Futurist webinar, and we are very excited to have Cecily Sommers join us for this conversation with our very own Chris Everett. Cecily is a renowned futurist and works with all of the big names, the companies that you've heard, the Googles, the Salesforces, the JP Morgan Chases of the world, to anticipate and navigate really transformational change. Cecily is the author of Think Like a Futurist, as well as a two-time TEDx speaker, and also has been named one of the world's top 50 female futurists by both Forbes and Wired. So decades of experience, extensive wisdom, knowledge, and we're super stoked to have you, Cecily, for this conversation. So thank you for being here.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Thank you, Joel and Holon, and everyone
Yeah.
who's come to be a part of this conversation. It's awesome.
And speaking of Holon, our very own Chris Everett is the Chief Beauty Officer of the Holon Institute. This is a perfect conversation for Chris as an accomplished musician, artist, designer, and just all around wonderful and beautiful human being. Beauty is Chris's language. That's why he is the Chief Beauty Officer. Nature is his framework. Chris is a sage and a guide for individuals and organizations in threshold moments of change, which is what we're here to talk about today. So change is all around us. It is the water we swim in constantly. And so this is a very timely conversation. In fact, we think it's not just timely for this particular moment, but for this generation of people who are currently populating Earth in this moment in human civilization. There's a lot of transformation happening. And so we're going to just dive right into it. And I think first, Cecily, it would be great if you could maybe just give us a few reflections on this moment specifically. What is the change that we are experiencing today? How is the change that we are experiencing today unique? And what does it mean for the current population today of folks who are just trying to make it, and whether it's leading a business or leading a family and everything in between? Give us a bit of the landscape overview.
Yeah, well, I think probably what you're describing for all the audiences you named is like, what's going on? Um, how is this moment unique? I think I'm going to start with all the ways that it's not unique.
Mm,
That, in fact, what we are in is a repeating historical cycle that we see across all of human history. And it's the same cycle that we see in nature, in the cosmos, in which all things are in continuous motion, typically going through phases of order, disorder, and reorder. And so we are clearly right on time for the phase change that happens every 100 years or so, the seculum, it's called. And in fact, you can go back through any group's history and see that every 100 years or so, this is what happens. And part of what this is means that it is typically a shifting of the global order,
mm,
usually through major technological transformations, which shape economies and revolutions and ways wealth is made and distributed. And so almost always it has the dynamics we have now, which is great polarization, increasing conflict, too much wealth at the top, none of it coming down to the bottom. And these are the conditions in which disorder raises its head and the old order falls apart. And then we go through a period of transition that's typically decades long before we see what takes new shape. So, what's unique to it is that it's unique to our lives. And in America in particular, and the American century, we had the imagination that we had figured it out, and that this kind of incredible growth and prosperity and stability and greater peace than any other time in history was something that was going to be ours to take for granted and to actually scale in all kinds of ways. And it turns out that not everybody agrees. And that's one of the conditions for things for stability is that there has to be agreement. And as we all know, in many parts of our lives, when a yes meets a no, the no always wins. And it's not just attitudinal, it's not just cultural, it's also a fact that the institutions and orders that we made in the 20th century, mostly post World War II, don't really hold us anymore. And they certainly don't hold where we're going. So they're falling apart and it's highly uncomfortable. And that is where we find ourselves right now, and where I find it incredibly vital that we all become what I call change literate. If we are to follow change and make sense of where we are and where things are headed, then we have to be able to read the signs of change, to also understand this cycle, to know that though it feels wrong, it's actually purposeful. And when we can do that, we can find our own bearing a little bit better, be a little less, and maybe a little bit like, ooh, let's see what's happening, and shift our state to be further engaged.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's a really good reminder, and I appreciate the um that the ability to kind of identify the pattern. And we're in the I'm sure you're familiar with like William Strauss's work and the fourth turning and all of that, right? That these patterns do exist throughout history. And that is a really important reminder and something that helps us to remain grounded, as you're saying, and to maybe even step back with a little bit of patience and not be so just the frenetic kind of urgency of, we got to solve all this right now, and say like, oh, let's participate in this unfolding. Um, I do think there are a few things that I wanted to mention in addition to what you were saying there, in regards to the ways that we are facing some unique challenges. I mean, I think that the human population has quadrupled in the last 100 years, right? That's had significant impact on resource utilization that has grown in the last 200 years by 1600x, based on the demand that we're putting on the planet, right? So the holding and carrying capacity of the planet, we've exceeded that, which is the first time that that's happened in history. You've got things like artificial intelligence, which as a technology is a techno it's a force amplifier, right? So all previous technologies, for the most part, are kind of limited to their domain, but AI is actually working across all sectors, domains, and industries. I think the nature of warfare today, going from kind of the very kinetic warfare of the past throughout all human history, to the kind of warfare we're seeing today around narrative warfare, cyber warfare, etc. All the economic competition and all the pressures there and what that means globally, as well as just other existential risks that are compounding through all of this. I mean, there are quite a few things that are quite significant that are really unique to this time and do create pressures that are unprecedented, even though the pattern itself is precedented to some degree, right? So I think it's a good and important thing to hold that in a non-dual way. Um, and that I think what you're getting at, and what I hear you saying, is there's a wisdom in recognizing the pattern despite some of the intensity of the challenges that we're facing. And that's a really, really lovely uh, reminder. So thank you for that. Chris, I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of just the state of the state, and your take on this, through your lens, and why recognizing these patterns are so important right now.
Mm. I have been I've been in deep admiration for Cecily's work, in the ways that I've been able to be exposed to it in our partnership in this last decade, and in particular in this moment, because it does call for a certain amount of equanimity, just to say what is, to look for the truth of the issue, and therefore what is the possibility of the issue, what judgments might I be bringing to the moment. And one of the things that I am very interested in personally, that is a beautiful alignment with her work as well. I hear from so many leaders and individuals alike, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? What are we supposed to do now? And it feels like the question, it may be more, who am I supposed to be right now
Hmm.
versus what am I supposed to do? That this is an inner look at what is the thing. One of Cecily's phrases is, what changes and what doesn't. And and this is the thing that doesn't change. This is my core way of being and seeing and moving in the world. And when we lose touch with that, because of the chaos or because of the panic or because of the uncertainty, we do get lost. And this is the center that this work is calling us into. I know we'll talk about it more here in a moment, but the first fluency of leadership in the program is about leading self. And it is starting with this core idea of understanding the cycle of change in the world and in life, in our personal lives and the lives of all of us in a culture. And what is the thread? What is the thing that is just true about me as I move forward? And that becomes the calm in the center of the storm. And so it is very interesting to look at the tumult that is going on, the massive change that is going on, the confusion, how difficult it is to know where is my place in all of this. But I am personally finding it calming to take it in and say, what is the thing about me that is just true and steady and clear and immovable and unchangeable from the outside?
Right.
And so that's the space where I'm really holding a lot of curiosity right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I really love that. I think that I mean, I get overwhelmed often thinking about all the external factors and the things structurally and systemically that are out there that we need to solve for. And it's all wildly entangled and compounding. And it's like, how you just, it's you begin to just approach it even from a distance, and it's overwhelming. And so I think that reflection on, okay, I can't control this external, but maybe I can go internal. And so, Cecily, maybe speak more to that and kind of how this change literacy, like how is that connected to self and kind of operating and being in this world today? Maybe begin to tether some of those things for us, and we can kind of explore those connections.
Yeah, I mean, this is where it all begins, is understanding the universal patterns, forces, and behaviors of change. And when they are universal, which means that they affect all living systems. And, I really have witnessed, and so I feel that this is very much true, is that when you understand that change has predictable patterns, anything is possible and everything is scalable. But it begins at the unit of one. So we have to practice everything and understand how change moves in and through us, because it is in the same patterns that we are going to be moving into our lives. So this spiral pattern of order, disorder, and reorder is alive in our lives right now for each one of us. There are certain things that are expiring and other things that are emerging. And so, one of my phrases is that the future is not figure outable, it is only followable. And so we become change literate so that we can follow the signals of change. Between the spiral and then later on, I train people in the four forces of change, what gives us a sense of what's changing in the environment. This is where the stability comes from, right? Not only are we grounded in our sense of purpose, which is critical, we also have to have a relationship with change itself, because otherwise we are separate from the change in the world. And our idea is to be able to follow it so that we can actually be in its groove, co-creating in real time. And that's different than the energy of saying, we need to figure this out and it's all
Mm.
going to crap, right? And that there is something that can stop it or the way things should be. And that's a whole different energy than relaxing into that there actually is a flow of change that we can follow, and it tells us where to go. Now, we bring all of our gifts to that following, to that groove of change, so that while we're there, we are participating and contributing in what we can do. And it doesn't mean we have all the answers, because nobody does. And I'm actually not, I don't believe that there are any answers. I do think it's through these individual contributions that as things become known, we can do a little bit more. So, yeah, in this first domain of leadership, so just let me pause to say, Lead Like a Futurist is a training for leaders where it is fundamentally training in knowing how to follow across 6 fluencies in leadership and in 3 domains of leadership. And we begin with leading self. Those 2 fluencies, the training is in reinvention, because this is core to the pattern of life itself. We want to be in that groove of our own reinvention so we can participate in the reinvention that's happening in our organizations and our society and the world at large. The second fluency is purpose. You know, what is it that we are here to do? It's the only thing that we can do, and it is our life force. For the time that we are alive, let's get busy. We move then into the second domain of leadership, which is leading strategy, where we do training in foresight and innovation. And each one of these builds on this. Now that we are fluent in the language and patterns of reinvention, we can begin to see them as we cast to the future and look at foresight and how it shapes strategy. Once you can see that future, it's time to make it. So we deal with that in innovation, and leading strategy is a very hands-on, practical way of meeting with that. And then finally, we get to leading culture and the last 2 fluencies in the program, which are belonging and wisdom. So the idea is that in leadership, we have to really orient ourselves to change at the atomic level, the unit of self. Only then can we actually guide others in it. We also have to be able to understand change in the environment because we're responsible for responding to it and directing a vision into that world based on our purpose. And we have to be able to be productive and planful about what that looks like. And only then, when we are clear and our vision is clear, can we say to others, let's go. And so that's where we build a real understanding of what belonging is and how it works. And then finally, each one of these has been a rung on the ladder up to the big payoff, which is wisdom. Because only in wisdom can we face the most difficult and challenging questions and the dark nights of the soul that we all face, especially when you're carrying responsibilities for other people. When we can look back and understand how change works so that we can really weigh the trade-offs, because they're always there, to make decisions about what will create the most good for the most people and ideally minimize harm, knowing that there will be a cost. So we are building the skills and the ways of seeing and thinking that allows us to make the toughest decisions in front of us, to do so with great humility and have studied enough that we actually know what there is to discern, and to move away from the freak out reactive phase and into a very thoughtful idea of what moment are we in? What is our job to do as a part of this moment? What are we resourced to do? And have a sense of foresight about where things are headed, even though our past is being chewed up in record time. So it's tricky, but we need to equip ourselves to be resourced to rise. To resource to rise to the moment, to ourselves, to the needs in front of us, to the possibilities that we can now see and follow and be responsive to. So it's this whole ride. It's an arc of development that ultimately does go on forever, but that these are kind of the basic skills that equip us to do that, to be resourced to rise in wisdom, to meet this moment.
Yeah, I love that. I love also that there is no kind of destination, to your point, that it does just keep going, that this is a developmental journey. And to clarify for those here, as well as those who may watch this later, the Lead Like a Futurist is your program, Cecily, that you've crafted to help leaders adopt the 6 and learn these 6 fluencies of reinvention, purpose, foresight, innovation, belonging, and wisdom. I love that taxonomy and kind of this ontology of development that you've created here around leading like a futurist. It's really wonderful. Um, Chris, Cecily mentioned starting with the unit of self. Can you speak to self and what is self, and how does our construct of self really determine our lens and our perspective and how we relate to the world?
Mm. Yeah, thanks for that. Great question. We uh, last fall had a conversation like this around imagination. And for me, kind of self lives in this space of worldview from the inside, what we dream about, what we hope for, the narratives and the stories that we tell. Um, uh, and the way that it is connected to then how I move through the world and how I react to the world, how I meet the world around me. Um, we've recently been speaking about the four separations that we feel that beauty does an incredible job of helping mend self, separation with others, nature, and the mystery. And the Leading Self program, these two fluencies do such a beautiful job of reconnecting to self and this panic of, oh, I'm changing. Oh, something's coming to an end. Oh, I've got to get this figured out. What am I supposed to do now? All of these kinds of questions. And even this notion of endless reinvention, that reinvention is a cycle, and that in each one of these chapter turns, there is something that repeats, and there is no arriving. And as I go out and I go up and I get excited, and then something starts expiring, to Cecily's point, and something new is emerging, that often there's this space. And this is where we meet a lot of people in this work of kind of the in between, where we don't know really what is coming. And we feel like we should be doing something. And particularly if you are a leader, you have a particular pressure to have the answers of where this is going, what it's going to be. And of course, there's strategy that will come, but there is a liminal space that we get to, that it's really important that we sit in and listen, listen, listen to what's in here, what is being called for, to quiet the external voices, to re-engage the internal voices, to re-engage the imagination that we spoke about. And I think one of the things that's been a delight for me in the Leading Self program, when we get to this moment of talking about the chapter turns, number one is recognizing, oh yeah, this has been happening over and over and over again. This is, of course, I'm just in another chapter, and there's going to be a new energy and a new possibility, but also the invitation to say, you're right on time. You're not behind. Can we, be a little more gentle with yourself? Because we do have this kind of endless pressure that we're behind and there's more to do, or everybody else is ahead of us, or whatever that is. But you are right on time. So settle in, take a breath, and listen, because your body knows the thread of your purpose of life is there, and it is followable. And it brings you back into self. And so for me, self, and I would love to hear Cecily's thoughts about this as well, but it is a calming of the voices and a knowing that everything that I need is right here. And my brain may not know, but my body may know what is around the corner and what is emerging. We have spoken about before. Someone offered, that they went to a concert or a gathering that was way outside of their area of expertise, and they were just on the edge of their chair, and they were excited, and they were noticing that their body was like, yes, yes, yes. We were like, pay attention to the yes. Your body is telling you there is something here for you. And that gets kind of exciting to remember our wisdom that lives inside of here.
Yeah, Cecily, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well, and maybe just briefly before you jump in, I think that self is often a story, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. That that's the construct of self is a story that we tell ourselves about who we are, and sometimes that story can be really rooted in a relationship with someone else. It can be rooted in pain or trauma. It can be rooted in what we
Mhm.
do in our vocation. It can be rooted in, right, a bunch of things, the ways that we cope, the ways that we deal with the stress of life. It can be rooted in an interest or, a fandom or a mythology. It can be rooted in a practice of spirituality or otherwise. And so is there something here about to navigate our times, to lead like a futurist, and to have these, to really practice change literacy? What's the role of awareness of the story of self? How do we actually remove ourselves from being in the story to actually being able to observe the story that we tell ourselves about who we are?
Mm.
And to maybe even interrogate it a little bit so that that story can be reinvented, right? Which is your first
Mhm.
fluency. So I'd love to hear you riff on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, these are big, juicy questions, aren't they? Um, so one of the things that uh, we anchor ourselves in reinvention is that, our experience occurs on two axes of being. One is the vertical axis, in which this is space. And in space is consciousness. It is all the things that are kind of have infinite, inchoate non-form. So love lives there, wisdom lives there, knowing lives there. Anything that does not live in the material world is in the aspect of space. Time is the other horizontal dimension, and time is the one of matter and form. So we can think about field and form, or awareness and action. So I believe, I have a more than 30-year Buddhist practice behind me that informs some of what I'm about to say as well. And that is that many of the things you were describing, Joel, have more to do with our identity. And sometimes when we become too attached or confused about self and identity as being the same thing, is often when we get pulled off our center. And it's usually where we have suffering and drama and stories about who we are, the way things should be, whether we're enough, whether we're not enough. And we do indeed address that in Leading Self. Because one of the ways out of that is to get what I refer to as the futurist perspective. And the futurist perspective is, kind of, in my view, the highest perspective. We have, the observer's perspective, which is a little bit about being in the balcony looking over the dance floor. And that often gives us a situational perspective that's very important. We also have the 30,000-foot view perspective, looking outside of a plane window, and we watch the terrain change from the plains up into the mountains and then back down into the oceans. And we see how things are organized and that they're bigger than we are. And in the futurist perspective, we're up into the cosmos, in a sense, to again visit the basic principles of how things work and are designed at their most essential level. And it's when we go up that far that we begin to tap into an awareness that I like to describe as that we are born in this package of stardust. It is the cosmic dust, each one of us unique. And in this container called a body or a lifetime or whatever it is, this life is alive in and through us. And so we can call that whatever you want to, because it's all just words anyway. But when we're talking about leading self in our vernacular, that's the stardust. This life that is in us is what we are relating to. Now, of course, we have form in this world, not only in our bodies, but in our jobs and our relationships, our cultures and identities. But we want to hold those loosely because it's not the same. And we do have a whole exercise, in fact, that we do about getting caught in the drama triangle, which is typically where identity and self mash, and we think that something's wrong and that it's not supposed to be, and we feel threatened by it. And all of that is something that is in this story field that you were referring to. And by going up into the futurist perspective, we're able to watch the dynamics of that triangle. so that we can see the only way up and out of it. Because if you stay in the triangle, that's the dynamic. It's designed to go the way that it does. And then there are tools that we have about how to hinge into the vertical and get that perspective in a flash, and how to also bring ourselves back to self. It's a return to self over and over again, through the 4 habits of mind, which I use, but also in anything that gives us that lived experience of, I am here again. I am back to presence. I am connected again. I am alive again. I am in my yes again. I am in my intrigue and interest again. I'm back. And so there's kind of a yes to what all of those things, but that's how I understand it, and try to use it for some ways to keep us getting free as we go. Because we're hinging between the vertical and horizontal all the time, and we get stuck all the time. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just the way we are designed to have minds that create stories. And so it is. But we don't ever want to believe them too hard, because they do not define us. And when we allow that to define us, we suffer and we feel stuck. And so the idea is to have some freedom with that through awareness. Yeah.
Yeah, there's really great liberation in that for folks. I think that's really beautiful. When you said Stardust package, in my mind, I pictured the little Kool-Aid packets as a kid when you dump it into the water jar and it like the colors like this. Oh, it's such a beautiful, yeah, and I could see kind of the shimmer and sparkle of the stars there, and that is a beautiful, wonderful word picture. That was a little joy. Um,
Yeah. Just the last thing I want to say about why it's meaningful to me is because it just as it reinforces this idea is that the universal life forces are what we are made of. So let's cooperate with them.
right. Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. On that point, I mean, this is a question that I've had a lot of fun asking various folks over the last few months. You know, we talk a lot about self as kind of the seat of transformation, and there's a lot of construct around notions of consciousness, phenomenology, and experience, meaning making. Right? These things are fundamentally like individualistic in their happening, in the phenomenon of these unfoldings. But what we know also is that while there is an individual perspective, there's also a more than individual, right? So, uh, we know that identity is not individualistic. Like even the Lone Ranger is identified by his relationship as being separate, right? So that there's everything's hyper relational in that sense, and um, with what we're learning about consciousness and kind of the world of panpsychism and what's emerging there around consciousness being something that's a universal constant that we tune into, it reframes like, okay, so is consciousness something that emerges from a person, or is it something a person can collect, like tap into? And if that's the case, do we collectively tap into something, et cetera, et cetera? It just starts to like, I think we're shaking some of the maybe previously tightly held notions of self and individual, and those there's some loosening there around some of the maybe the parts of the construct of self that have galvanized through very emergent and in some cases speculative theory about the world. All of that to say, is the question, what does it mean to be me, even the right question? Should we actually be asking, what does it mean to be a planet? Or what does it mean to be a community? What does it mean to be a species? What does it mean to be the universe? If we are indeed just a part, an embedded part of a bigger network and system and ecosystem, right? Um, so there's not a solid question in all of that. It's a bit of a shotgun kind of splatter of uh, armchair philosophy, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts on the ways in which notion of self is being interrogated, disrupted, and how there might be opportunities to expand selfhood in this era.
Well, I have to go back in history a little bit to kind of get the full view. Um, We're shaped by a lot of things, and we're often shaped a lot by science is one of the ways in which our worldview literally shifts when we begin to have tools that allow us to peer into the galaxies and see things that we never understood before and make new deductions. When we have
Right.
microscopes that take us down. And so in our Western society, modern society, we've been very much shaped by the scientific revolution.
Yeah.
And it really allowed us to interrogate matter and mystery and
Mm.
to have tools that kind of poke into them and get data back. And in so doing, really be able to kind of do extraordinary things. Medicine arises out of that, public policy arises out of that, the idea of psychology arises, the idea that we are not kind of dictated to by gods, but that we have some agency within ourselves. We have new revolutions and social movements that arise out of that, civil rights rise out of that, all kinds of things. Because now we have some sense of like how things work and how we are going to be agents of change in the world. And with that comes the Renaissance. And with that comes the Enlightenment and this idea that each one of us is here to kind of create our path. And in the American centuries, we're now about to be 250 years old. We were founded on those principles. And so in this Western era in which America's been a big force, we have taken all this to a moment of kind of the apex of individuality. And every one of us on this call, every one of us alive today has been raised to a certain degree, and especially since the 60s and 70s. And so as science begins to, and there's always countercultures and ways that we get pulled in different directions. Right now, we have the hard problem of consciousness, which effectively says, so the science we've made to date actually help us? Can it do the job of interrogating that question? Or is new science arising? Is quantum a part of that? We don't know. And so computer scientists, believe that we can always decode everything. Philosophers are always working alongside, theoretical physicists, alongside philosophers, alongside sages and saints and spiritual ways of being. So after all of that little preamble, I will say that the only thing we ever can truly report on is from the self. So I start to feel uncomfortable. This is just my own bias around making too many proclamations about the way the world is. Now, I've studied a lot to the degree that it helps me come back to myself and that it helps others do the same. I'm kind of for it. But we can't, this is just again my view. I'm not so sure we can ask what it means to be a planet because it's all going to be an interpretation through who you are and where you were born and how you've lived. And so your interpretation is going to be very different from everybody else's. So we ask those big questions as if there's an answer. I think it gets tricky because if we believe there's an answer, then we actually believe everybody else should believe the same thing. When in fact, the only thing we can ever know comes through us. So I know what I know because I have my direct experience. And that's where consciousness lives in me. It doesn't, I can tap into things that help me feel bigger than that, help me feel aware of it. Do I really know what it means? Does anybody know what it means? I don't know. But to the degree that it helps me be a better person who is freer and more at peace and more able to bring who I am to the world, I'm for it. I'm for it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of unknowable. So we live with a yes and of, oh, this feels true, and I'll never know. To me,
Yeah.
that is kind of a humble wisdom that feels wise, and
Hmm.
maybe not everybody feels the same way because they don't, So
Yeah.
we are who we are. We share what we got.
Yeah. That's good.
I,
Uh,
I would love to add two things to
yeah,
that.
please.
One is you were talking about the holonic principle, that everything is whole in itself and part of a bigger whole at the same time. And do we really understand what the bigger whole is, or even how big the bigger whole is? We probably will never know, but that is the nature that we are. It is yes and. I am Chris and I am planet at the same time. And I am ancestors and I am a bigger, who knows how big that goes. But I don't, what I also just learned is this is a very Western question. I just spent some time in Japan having a conversation about the word I, and that there is no word for I in Japanese. And in fact, in Japanese, it is always we. My friend was saying that there are like 80 different words for the word we. When her mom is speaking to her, she doesn't mean I as in mom. She's always referring to we. Her version of I is mom and you. When I say I in front of a crowd, is I in crowd. You say I in nature, it is myself in nature. There is no such thing as individual in the language, and that is something that they have learned from the United States and has been a gift to them culturally to ask, what do I want? And she was saying this is still very uncomfortable for her to even consider what the individual wants. But now they're seeing the shadow distortion of that in the way that a new generation is disregarding elders, is disregarding taking care of everyone else, society, and what ways have we experienced the shadow side of being such an individualistic society that believes in freedom and independence and all the rest of it. So it is complicated. It's really complicated.
Yeah.
But it's also a very Western notion too.
Yeah. I would love to keep spiraling on this. This is a conversation I feel like we can have for hours, but I do want to, for the sake of time, get to a couple other things here, specifically innovation. Cecily, I think, innovation continues to be a mandate for leaders and organizations, right? And one of the things that you said, I'm curious to get your take on this about following the signal and following change. So what's the relationship, let me see here. I want to articulate this well here. I think when I think about innovation, I think about being the signal, not following the signal. What's the relationship between following change versus driving change? And I not only because there's a market imperative to innovate to remain competitive, but because we need to do things that are unprecedented. We need to actually create systems and products and services that don't exist right now, which means there may not be a signal to follow. How do we create a field of opportunity and possibility where we can be the actual signal, where we can be the change that we want to be, and to step in and operate in that space?
I think I kind of go back to, I think the fundamental principles still hold. And one is that you start with purpose. What are you here to do? Whether it's as an individual, a small company, or a larger organization, an agency and a government. What is your purpose? How do you define what you're here to do? So that's your compass into the future, no matter the conditions. Now, we also have to have something in mind that we think is useful to solve for. And inside of that, it's important to be watching how things are changing, because the mandate of life is to stay relevant. And so it is important to follow the signals of what's happening so that you can see what you're here to do through the lens of those emergent possibilities. And not, the whole field is not yours. The thing that you're here to do is yours. And then you look at your resources and assets and what you're equipped to experiment with, because it is in the direction of your vision. And then you investigate that and work it out so that you can say, it looks like this is actually ours to do. We are well equipped. It is a proprietary advantage. Let's check it out through the lenses of the four forces, the force fields that I teach, for instance, so that we can then say, That would be a beautiful thing to do. Now let's reverse engineer it into what is it that we're going to do right now so that it's always aligned with that future vision while being super responsive on your way there. So it's endless experiments that are what I refer to as being directionally right. But they
Mm.
have been grounded in purpose, they have been grounded in good research, and they are directed towards an objective. So I don't know how that maps to how you're thinking about being the signal. I think maybe I would interpret being the signal as what's your purpose telling you,
Yeah.
and how does that play out in this context? And the context is changing, so we have to be endlessly, reinvention, the continuous reinvention is really what each one of us, actually, it's already happening, so we might as well agree with it.
Hmm.
But organizationally, we now have to learn how to manage as an organization that is ongoingly reinventing itself, which is very different form of management than we've done, which is usually designed for a solid state. But we are moving into a time where nothing's solid. And
Yeah.
so we have to, in fact, follow the signals because it's otherwise too chaotic and
Yeah.
be aligned with our compass and our purpose to actually have something that we're here to do, but
Yeah.
having checked it out according to how context is changing.
Can you unpack that in regards to clarity versus control?
And we don't have any control. We don't have any control. We do have agency, but it's not the same thing. Um, so these are these paradoxes that I love. For instance, I also find that sometimes we regain our power when we realize we were powerless. That idea of we are returned to ourselves when it's like it's not ours. We cannot control how this goes and we cannot control how the outcome. But we can engage and participate for the learning and the interest because our growth is always available to us. And as long as we're pursuing that, then we're on. And as long as we're doing it according to what we're here to do, we're on. And so that's the deal. There is no control and it will always backfire. Now, it doesn't mean we don't manage our resources and our talents, which is a resource, as wisely as we can. It doesn't mean that we're not editing a lot as we go, as new information comes in, and we sometimes have to pivot, often letting go of things in order to be free to pursue something more. So, yeah, I think control is an illusion and it's one that gets us into trouble.
And so clarity, then it's about relinquishing control, but gaining clarity. I love that language of like you're directionally right
Yeah.
in as you're investing in innovation, there's kind of multi-dimensionality to the experiments that you're running that are basically amplifying the signal strength of various signals that you're paying attention to that inform your direction. And so you're constantly iterating towards this, but it's all flowing from a place of purpose. Is that a fair?
Yes, and my model for understanding the four forces of change, which are kind of the roots of society. They are the pillars of society, and I'll just name them quickly: resources, technology, demographics, and governance. Whole different conversation.
Yeah.
But when you are checking against that and scanning that, that also means you know what you're scanning as you go. So you've chosen a direction, you have an objective, you've checked it out. Is it the right thing to do? We think so. Enough that we're willing to make that bet. And we're watching those force fields as we go. So we're not getting signals from everywhere. They're channeled for us into a focused framework that help us make sure what's changing, what do we need to be responsive for. So we can again bring this calm of following with us. And you know, doing the next experiment forward. Um, so I don't know if that answered your question, but that's what I think innovation looks like. And when you do reverse engineer from the vision that you have, one of the exercises Chris and I do in reinvention is to go reference the dreams that you hold Because as I say, though your dreams don't always come true, there is truth in them. Though your vision that you hold may not come to pass, that fact that it's in you tells you what you are supposed to do. And
Mm.
it is likely to look different by the time you get there. But again, it casts the direction for you to pursue. And so I think that's incredibly useful. But we know what we're following and we can trust it. It actually, there are no external guardrails. These guardrails tell us the pattern of change, the forces of change, what our purpose is, how it's directionally right, that we know how to be leaders inside of this moment and make the next best decision because we have the view. And it all helps us kind of stay, the promise of lead like a futurist. It just says there is a calm at the center of the storm. It is you. And when you can operate from this place, with these tools and frameworks, becoming change literate, it's possible. It's not just a mindset, right? These aren't aphorisms. They're real tools
Yeah,
and methods. Yeah.
I
I
love
just
that.
want to
That's a
offer very quickly that
go ahead.
I've been in brand strategy, design, innovation for 3 decades now. Mostly on the agency side, I've worked with CPG, B2B. People talk about strategy all the time and purpose all the time and reinvent. I have never in my career experienced the rigor of Cecily's frameworks and the depth of now I deeply understand strategy and how to make really solid and practical and inspiring strategy that has been tested, that has all the pieces, has the depth of the research. Purpose has gone to a whole other level. The ability to step into reinvention with a rigor that I've never experienced with any other agency or organization. There is incredible depth to this work in the ways that we have, all these words have become very shallow and they have incredible depth to them again, which gets me so excited. This is real, true leadership development.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. I mean, that's a great to this work and to Cecily's impact. And there's a lot of juicy goodness in all of this. And so, Cecily, for those who are interested, you and Chris are hosting a 3-day experience coming up here this summer. Can you give us a quick kind of rundown on that and when it is, what's going to happen, and how this, people can kind of double click on all this and go much deeper with you and Chris?
Well, first of all, you should know that Chris has been part of the development of this work from the very beginning. And so he's in it with us and is a beautiful facilitator of it in real time.
Mm.
We are in Minneapolis, and this is where we are going to do it in a really cool space, July 17th through 19th. And we are doing the leading self dyad of fluencies. It is reinvention and purpose. And this is the foundational work for everything else that is in Lead Like a Futurist. And I like to believe in your life. I believe Chris has just offered the link there, but you can also find it if you're just searching around on leadlikeafuturist.com. It has the Leading Self-Intensive tab there that you can go and learn more about it, register. There's tiered pricing for people in all different stages of their life because we know people are losing jobs, gaining jobs, changing directions, and just know that we've got you and that you have a place here in this work. If you can join us in July, along with Heather Willems, who is also on the call. She's a part of our team as well, where she is going to be capturing and documenting all this work and her gorgeous graphic facilitation. So we're very fortunate to have this gem of a team in this beautiful space with work that we love at the right time for those who say yes.
Beautiful. Cecily and Chris, thank you so much for this conversation. There's so much here, and I can't wait to continue it. And hope folks get the chance to sign up, and we'll see you there.
Great. Thank you
Thank you,
so much, Joel.
Joel.
Thanks all.
Thank